Ladies and gentlemen, how do?
Hello and welcome to Mondo Street Social Club, a new podcast aimed at bringing creative minds together. Mondo Street is about sharing the creative process, discussing the highs and lows, and talking about how we cope when the creative genie eludes us. Pull up your comfy chair, put in your best headphones, and enjoy the next hour. Hello and welcome to Mondo Street Social Club. Today I am joined by Johnny Flores, founder of Flores Podcast Productions, all the way from Sacramento in California. Hi, Johnny.
Hi, Phil. Thanks for having me on.
Great. How are you? You well?
I'm doing really well. I'm overall really happy and doing well
Good.
right now.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So Johnny, you've by the very name, you're owner founder of Flores Podcast Productions. You help people to produce podcasts. How did you get into that line of work? Because I don't think it's something that you went through school and went, oh, when I grow up, I want to be a podcast producer.
No, in fact, yeah, I was well into my 30s when I started doing podcasting. It was completely by accident. I had a neighbor who lived across the street from me um, at the old house I used to rent. Um, and I was always into nerdy stuff, and he had approached me and said, "Hey, would you want to do a podcast?" This was around 2011, somewhere around there, and I had just started listening to podcasts from How Did This Get Made? I was listening to that podcast pretty heavily, and I was like, "Sure, what do you want to do?" And he's like, "I don't know. You come up with the idea." I was like, "Okay, and how do we do it?" He goes, "Well, don't worry about that. I've got all the equipment. Just figure out what you want to do." So I kind of thought about it, and in keeping in line with my nerdiness, I had thought, "Oh, well, I'll do kind of a nerdy roundtable podcast, like pop culture nerd stuff."
Mhm,
And I invited a couple friends on, and we did that for almost 2 years. And then people, because we were in our early 30s, late 20s, people started getting married and having kids, and I
mhm,
was just having a harder and harder time getting people on the podcast that I had come to really enjoy having on the podcast, my friends, and people I'd met through kind of nerdy stuff. Um and I had made every mistake you could possibly make with that podcast, like not posting episodes regularly, and just everything you could do wrong with the podcast I did with that one. And so after about a year and a half, 2 years, uh, we stopped it, and I kind of sat on it for a little while, and I thought, oh, if I do another one, I want it to just be me, because it's so much easier to manage the production if it's just
mhm,
me and a guest. Like, I'll just have one guest on. Um, and being in Sacramento, well, we were kind of talking about this before we started recording, how we're so close to the Bay Area. We're always like kind of in the shadow of the Bay Area, and
yeah.
um, a lot of bands, bigger acts, will skip over Sacramento and just go
Mhm,
straight to San Francisco. A lot of comedians will do that too. They won't even play in Sac; they'll just go right to San Francisco or Oakland. And there wasn't a lot of like self love in the city for the city, and I love living here. Um, And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to do a podcast about Sacramento. I'll have people on that I've met. I used to be a freelance illustrator and artist, like as a side gig, and I thought, okay, I'll start having those people on, because I met all these amazing people who were doing really neat, creative things and making Sacramento so interesting to me.
mhm,
And so I started having them on, and this was in 2014, and the podcast just took off right away. Within the second year, third year, somewhere in there, it was getting several hundred downloads, and by the third year, it was a few thousand.
wow, it's impressive.
Um, yeah, and this was early in the podcasting. Serial hadn't even, I don't think, was even out at that point yet. which really broke the door open
Mm.
on podcasting. And yeah, and the show just got really popular. And I did the show from 2014 to 2019, and during the course of the show, previous guests that I had on or people that had become friends with through the podcast were starting to move up in their
Mm.
careers
Yeah.
and were now in sort of in charge of things, or they were team leaders. And um, they started asking me to help them create a podcast for their companies that they were managing. And I didn't even know. I remember my first friend who asked me to do that. She's like, "What do you think you could do it for?" And I was like, "I don't know. I have no clue. What do you think I should do it for?" She goes, "Could you do it for $1,500?" I was like, "Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to make a podcast for $1,500." And so she asked me to send her an invoice, and I told her I don't know how to do that. I don't know
Mm.
how to write an invoice. So she helped write me. She kind of helped co-author my first invoice that I just ended up handing right back to her.
Yeah.
And that really got the ball rolling. That was in 2016, and in 2018, I left my job. I had a job. It was kind of a toxic work environment. I was ready
Okay.
to just ready to move on to something else.
Mhm.
And my girlfriend really encouraged me for several months, quit your job and just do this. People are asking you to help. I was kind of known in Sacramento as the podcasting guy. And yeah, that's how I founded my company and got going.
That's a that's a really good story. I think the thing for me is you mentioned that you were starting to take to work on for other people creating podcasts at the same time as dealing with issues in the workplace. So it must have been a fairly stressful time for you.
Yeah, and on top of that, we had just bought a house,
Oh,
the house we're in, and
yeah.
it was an old house and it had a lot of issues. The house hadn't been taken care of, so it was just this perfect storm of a toxic work environment,
Yeah.
an old house,
Yeah.
running my own podcast that I was
Mhm.
kind of a little bonkers about, and then helping other people. Yeah, it was a really stressful period at kind
But
of perfect storm.
you prevailed and came through the other side. So when you set up your own company, how long did it take for you to actually become independent? To actually say this is a going concern, this will feed us, will pay the bills, everything we need.
Well, I cashed out my retirement. I kind of went all in.
Okay.
So I cashed out my retirement. So I had a nice little nest egg to help kind of usher, or not usher, but just kind of pad me out until I got my first client. But it was for a couple months. When I left that job, I was in a really negative state of mind
Mm,
because it just wore me down really pretty bad,
yeah.
and I had no faith. I was like, "Oh, this isn't gonna work." And there was a woman here in Sacramento. Her name's Tina, and she owns a a marketing company called Uptown Studios. And she's an amazing person. She's really helpful, very sweet. She does a lot for our community. And I had her on my podcast, and when she at the time she had told me, if you ever start a business, I don't know, maybe she saw something in me, some sort of like entrepreneurial
Yeah, yeah.
thread that I wasn't seeing. But I remember her saying, "If you ever start a business, come talk to me. I'll mentor you." And yeah, I was just like just in this really negative headspace after leaving that job, and was sort of kind of like, I'm gonna have to go back to work, or I'm gonna have to go get a job somewhere.
Yeah.
And Sasha, my girlfriend, had said, "Go talk to Tina. She had told you if you ever leave your job, she's gonna help you. Like,
Mhm.
go talk to her." So I messaged her, and she said, "Yeah, come in next week. I've got time." And she put after we talked, she gave me a bunch of tips, just like on business, creative stuff, but also managing your business, managing clients, things like that. And then she put out the word on LinkedIn saying, "Hey, I know somebody that does podcast production if you're
Yeah.
looking for somebody to help you." And I got my first client that right after that through her. And then things were going well until the pandemic, and then kind of slowed down
Yeah.
because I get paid out of marketing budgets for the most part. So things were going really well and until the pandemic. In fact, I had a bunch of potential clients on the hook.
Mm.
This was going into 2020. So I had a studio at the time.
Yeah.
So I'd upgraded all my equipment because I'm like, I got all these clients coming in.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get better equipment. I'm gonna just do a couple little upgrades so things are better for them and me. And that that March, I went to go visit my dad and his girlfriend down in Los Angeles, and they had said, we're a little. This is before like anything really spread. Well,
Mm.
unironically, before anything spread about like, hey, you might have COVID, they had said, we don't feel good. Just to give you a heads up, we've had this cold for a while. We just can't shake. And so I was like, oh, it's okay. I'll be, no biggie. So I went down there, visited them, came back, and the next day everything shut down.
Yeah.
And then a week later, all those potential clients said, hey, we're closing our marketing budgets because we're laying people off and we don't know what's going to happen. Um, and yeah, a bunch of other clients that I had all said we have to pause. Almost, no, I should say some. All of my clients at that time said we have to pause our contract with you because we
Wow.
don't know what's going to happen. And then the main client I work with, my biggest client that I've worked with the longest, um, called me and said, "Hey, could you do what? Could you?" Because they laid off almost their entire staff,
Yeah.
and said, "Could you do this much? Could we pay you this much to just do a little podcast? We need to have some sort of marketing
Mm.
out there." And I said, "Sure, anything.
I'll
Well,
do anything.
I'll
Yeah.
take anything right now." And luckily, my girlfriend has a very stable job, good paying
Yeah.
job, so
Yeah.
it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great.
Yeah.
Um, so weathered through that, and I ended up getting a grant through the city of Sacramento. They had a creativity grant that helped, people that work in the creative fields. I got a grant through them, and then that one client, the main client, just said, "Hey." After several months, they ended up paying me out for the entire contract that we had
Okay.
paused.
Yeah.
Very, very kind, generous people. I love working with them,
Yeah. Yeah.
and yeah, and now things are slowly,
Mm.
all 3 years later, finally starting to creep back up to normal as far as
Yeah.
work production.
Yeah. But what a way for your what a way for your mental health. You've gone from such a low point to when you started and you've had that support. You've gone up, then COVID's come along, and COVID must have put a heck of a pressure on you to try and
That that year 21
yeah,
was bad,
yeah,
really bad. We had a lot of deaths in our family.
yeah.
My girlfriend and I came very close to splitting up. We ended up going to couples therapy and individuals therapy, and that
Okay.
really helped us a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
That's a brave move because a lot of people, even now, don't see the value of talking therapies. And for me, personal experience and of those around me, a talking therapy, a therapy where you have a safe space to discuss things,
mhm.
is it's one of the most powerful tools we've got. It's we can sit and be honest,
Yeah.
or as honest as we are brave, because it does take an awful lot of bravery and to enter into those contracts with people to talk to them like that.
It also has to, you have to it's sort of like, I mean, it's not the same thing at all, but it's sort of like accepting that, like, hey, I'm something in me's not working. I need to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
And that's hard, I think, for some people to admit,
Mm.
especially men,
Yeah.
and I'm Hispanic. My dad's side of the family's Mexican, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of machismo crap in that. And, and
Yeah.
it's, like, I'm tough, I'll tough this out. And,
Yeah.
and, no, it was great. It was great. I don't regret going to therapy one bit. I'm in
Yeah.
such a better mental state than I was. You know, we my girlfriend and I both had traumatic childhoods. I mean, not every, I shouldn't say like everybody's got
Mm.
great everybody has their issues with their childhood,
They
but
do, yeah.
and it was a lot of stuff I from that I had never dealt with.
Yeah.
Same for her. And then just all the, like I was saying, like we during 21, the year started off with my grandmother dying. She'd been in a coma for several years, and she
Jeez.
finally passed. At, like, I'm not kidding. It was like the first in January she
Oh,
passed, and then um uh and then my girlfriend's uncle
wow.
died unexpectedly. Maybe this was
20.
2020,
Yeah.
because we didn't know it was. We later, everyone kind of pieced together he probably died from COVID.
Oh, wow.
Um, but we weren't sure at that time, that
Yeah,
nobody
yeah.
knew what and things, and that was right when things started locking down. That's
Mhm.
right. So this would have been 2020 into 21, and then uh, her her cat died that she had had forever. We had to
Oh,
put the cat. It died
gosh.
traumatically. It was not.
Oh, no.
And then her grandfather died, who helped raise her.
Ugh.
He was diagnosed with throat cancer and then died like weeks later. He
Wow.
passed.
Yeah.
And then we had to put my dog down that I'd had
Oh,
forever.
God.
And then one of my Navy buddies, I was in the Navy, and
Yeah.
uh a guy I'd known, since I was a kid, he died unexpectedly. It was just a
Jeez.
rough year, and then we
Wow.
almost split up. It
Yeah.
was rough. So get
And
therapy, because it'll
y
help you go through
yeah,
it if you're
and
listening
you
to this.
because I don't know what lockdown was like in America, because you look at things through the media's lens, and
Yeah.
unless you actually live that experience. Over here, lockdown was very authoritarian. We were allowed out for a walk for an hour once a day.
Oh,
It was
wow.
yeah, it was crazy. The first lockdown we had, there was absolutely there was no mingling, so I lived on my own at that time, so I didn't see anybody for days
Wow.
on end. And that didn't do me any good. I've got to be brutally honest about that. My girlfriend or my wife now, she lived 100 miles away, so the only contact we could have for 85 days was FaceTime. And
That's rough.
we'd only just started going out together. So we met in the November of 19, March 2020, country locks down, can't see her for 85 days.
Yeah.
And okay, it's the power of a good relationship that you can do that. You can have any contact is good contact, and because you share that time with that person.
Yeah.
But boy, oh boy, was it tough over here. I had to be 'cause my mum and dad are obviously they're older than me, otherwise they wouldn't be mum and dad. Um, but I had to be nominated to go and do their shopping, so you couldn't go into a supermarket. So you had to have special slots and gloves and masks. It was crazy. It really was.
Ours wasn't quite that authoritarian, but California uh, was much more cautious than like Texas and Florida,
Yeah,
who were just
yeah,
like, go do whatever.
yeah. See
Uh,
ya.
yeah, California had a pretty tight lockdown. We You could go, um, yeah, you could go shopping and doing stuff like that, but it was very cautious. And
Yeah,
grocery stores, they were really strict about, you had to maintain distance, you had to
yeah.
have gloves, masks, and if you didn't, you were turned away. And yeah, I was lucky. Well, yeah, we were going through a rough patch, my girlfriend and I, during that time. So it wasn't always the most pleasant to be in the house, just the
No,
two of us.
no,
But
no.
yeah, once we started doing therapy and stuff like that, it
Yeah.
got a lot easier.
And the thing is that you both came through that,
Yeah.
and you're now stronger as people, and still a strong couple.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
the dogs are asleep behind you, so it's obviously a very happy house.
Yes. Another great thing too is we have a really strong community in our neighborhood.
Yeah,
It's not like that. I don't know how it is over in Europe, but s- Americans are very um loners,
mhm.
like pull yourself up by your bootstraps
Yeah,
bullshit.
yeah, yeah,
Well, if people can cuss on this.
yeah,
And we're really lucky. the neighborhood we live in, we all know each other.
Yeah.
We say hi to each other. Everybody knows each other. We walk dogs and we say hi. And then the block that I live on, we hang out together all the time. In
Hmm.
fact, like the other day, one of our neighbors, two houses over, her car wouldn't start. And so she sent on WhatsApp, because we have a little WhatsApp for
Yeah.
our street, for our block. And she says, "Anybody home that can help me?" And two of our neighbors said, "Do you need a jump? If not, I can go take you to go get a battery. If it's not the
Hmm.
if we can't jump the car." Um, when the storms happened out here back in January, our next door neighbor, the tree in between their house and the house next door fell down, and it missed both houses, luckily,
Wow.
but it tore out their gas line and water line.
Oh God.
So myself, the husband, and the next door neighbor to them, we were all out there in the middle of the storm, digging the hole out, throwing
Oh,
mud, capping their
wow.
water.
Yeah.
We crimped their gas line. And when we had no power and water for 4 days, the neighbors across the street did, because they're on a different grid than
Hmm.
us.
Yeah.
They let everyone on our side of the street put food in their fridges.
Oh, nice.
They let us use their showers to,
Yeah.
they let us use their Wi-Fi, like
Yeah.
come over and like, "Hey, if you need to work from home or anything like that." So
Yeah.
we have a really strong community here, and
Hmm.
it's an amazing place to live. And that gives us a lot of, like, outside of the love that my girlfriend and I have for each other, we have
Hmm.
this love in our community for one
Yeah.
another, and it's great.
You're very
So
lucky with that. There's parts of England that are like that, part of the UK that are like that. There's parts that are loners, like you described the US as. It's all different shapes of folks and their approaches. So so then if you look at a client comes to you and says, I want a podcast, that seems like a very big, you know, it's a very big ask, isn't it?
it is, yeah.
Yeah. Because I know from experience working with creative people that when you say, I want this, they then have 1,000 questions. And it's very rarely that the person that says, I want a podcast or I want a blueprint or I want a painting knows the answers to all those questions. So you must have in your mind a real big creative streak that lets you interpret what people are guesstimating at.
Yeah, I'll start. I mostly work with businesses and associations. I don't work with a lot of individuals
Okay.
anymore. I kind of did in the beginning, but anymore I don't. Um, but it's just really dialing in on, like, well, why do you want a podcast? What
Yeah.
purpose is it going to serve? And why should anyone listen?
Yeah.
And that's like a thing I try and help them determine. That's kind of why I also work with businesses now,
Mhm.
because they do know why they want a podcast. Like, it's
Yeah.
usually part of their marketing platform, but I'll dial in on, is it, who's it intended for? Is it business to business? Is it for the
Mhm.
public? Is it internal?
Yeah.
A- and then that helps me narrow down further and further, sort of like whittling away at,
Mm.
like, you know, who's this for? How are we going to make the podcast?
Yeah.
And helping them see,
Mhm.
oh, this is how our podcast is going to be formatted, and the intended audience, why they'll listen.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a funny thing that when we look back at when podcasts started, most people were very skeptical about them. They thought it was some kind of something for hobbyists only,
Yeah.
with a very very small niche marketplace. But now, I think it's fair to say that every man and his dog has got or is considering having a podcast. Um, there's me saying that, and I've got a podcast. Th- There must come a point, whether commercially or for Joe Public, that we hit saturation. Because if you just look at the Spotify directory, there are hundreds of thousands of podcasts on there now. How do you how do you cut how do you cut through it? How do you find your area? How do you find
Well, like, I think niche is very important.
yeah,
People who try to be too broad, like, going back to that business mentor, she said something. There was uh, like a business networking event thing that she was the speaker at, and she was talking about you should really know who your audience is or your listeners.
Mhm.
And she had said or asked the audience, if you want me to evaluate who your audience is or who your customers are, raise your hand and I'll help you. Within 5 questions, I'll be able to tell you who your
Okay.
who is and who isn't your customer base. And this person raised her hand and said, "Oh, please evaluate mine." She was,
Mhm.
and she said, "Sure. What? Let me, what's your business?" And it was something like laser tag or
Okay.
some sort of like family fun center kind of thing like that. And she said, "Okay, well, who do you think your audience is or your customer base?" And she said, "Everyone." And right away she was like, "Nope,
Oh,
you don't know who your audience is. You don't know who your customers are."
yeah.
And she goes, "Well, what do you mean? Why do you think it's not this should appeal for everyone?" And then she asked, "What's your price point per person?"
Mhm.
And she said, "It's $70 for children and 120 or something like that for adults." And she said, "Nope." She said, there's very few families that are going to come to your center because
Yeah.
you're asking them to spend, $300
Yeah.
for a night out. That's not including a meal, that's not including drinks or anything like that."
Wow.
So, it really stuck with me. So now when I still do a lot of workshops, or like I happily give an hour of my time to someone if they want to talk about their podcast.
Mhm.
I'm happy to do that because I just want people to succeed, or feel good about making their podcast.
Mhm.
A lot of podcasters bail on their shows after about 10 episodes because they're not seeing traction. It's a
Yeah.
lot of work. They don't know
Mhm.
how to manage the show, how a production, how you should manage your production to make it
Mhm.
easier on you.
Yeah.
And so I'm happy to listen and give advice. And what that's one of the things is, like, you should know your niche. Like, why, if you're like, it's just a golf podcast, I'm like, okay, well, there's a million golf
Yeah.
podcasts.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's gonna make yours different? Is it for beginners? Is it for people who just like Callaway clubs? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
figure out what the thing is within the thing, and that's gonna get you an audience much faster,
Yeah.
and you'll be a lot happier making your show.
It differentiates you from the next podcast, doesn't it? That
Yeah,
yeah. Yes, it's definitely something that you personally, I think a lot of people look at podcasting nowadays and they look at the people like Joe Rogan, for example, who has well, he's got a reach further than most governments. You know, he has millions of downloads, millions of listeners, and gets
yeah,
paid millions of dollars. And I think a lot of people see that as a podcast as an easy way into it, and not what it is in reality, which is a long game. It's a grind. You know, you said about 10 episodes and most people bail. Yeah. I was talking to one of the first guests on this podcast. He's been doing this podcast now. I think he's at episode 210. And he knows that his numbers, he'd love his numbers to be higher, but they are what they are. What he concentrates on is the quality of his output, making it
yeah.
so that if one day somebody turns in, you know, listens in and goes, "Oh, have you heard this?" And then that starts to spread, there's a library of quality behind him, as opposed to that one episode was done properly. But I just, you know, podcasting's great, but I just wish people didn't think of it as an easy win.
Well, the other thing too that people don't take into consideration, someone, it is a long game, like you were saying.
Yeah.
Like, one of my clients, their episodes have doubled every year,
Wow.
but we're 4 years into it, and they have a marketing team.
Yeah.
They work in tourism, so they know their audience. They know how to market stuff. They know how to write. They have a whole 30-person team that pushes out content
Mhm.
and does marketing, and they're good about getting tourists to come visit cities.
Yeah.
For someone who's just, one of the things I tell people when they first start off is, like, if you don't already have a huge following, for some reason you're not famous, if you're not an influencer, I even though I don't like that word, but
Mm.
if you're not a known entity for some reason, you're starting from zero.
Yep.
And what people don't realize is Joe Rogan, Mark Maron,
Mhm.
How Did This Get Made team.
Yeah.
They've been doing comedy for decades.
They
Joe
have.
Rogan and Mark Maron have been doing that for 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
And the podcast was an extension of their already existing comedy
Yeah.
career.
Yeah.
Um, so if you're not out there in front of an audience some way already,
Hmm.
it's hard to, you have to be, you need to do your show because you love it, not
Hmm.
because you're like, I'm going to get famous and
Yeah.
make tons of money.
Totally. Because
Yeah.
you mentioned your client that's got 30 people on the marketing team. If you are making a podcast on your own, then you are the producer, the host, the
The
engineer,
director.
the marketing team, the
Yeah.
the the guest liaison. You are everything,
Yep.
and it's not something that you can enter into lightly if you are serious about it. Because for every hour of recording that you do, you've got at least 2 hours of editing.
Oh, more. It's for someone quick like me,
Yeah.
a minute of recording time takes,
Yeah.
it's about 2.5, 3 minutes
Right. Okay.
to fix.
Yeah.
So if you're new starting off, you figure it's gonna be
Yeah.
5, 6, 7 minutes
Yeah.
to edit and do your EQs and
Yeah.
all that stuff. So
Yeah. I've got some good work streams in Logic Pro. There you go.
I use 3 different programs to do all my stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do all my sound fixing and all that in Isotope RX10.
Yep.
I export that out to Audition,
Mhm.
where I do all my quick edits and some other little sound fixes, and you know, lining everything up. Big cuts where I already know, like I'm like, I need to just cut this from minute 5 to minute 7 point whatever,
Yeah.
because we were just talking. We were figuring out what the rest of the episode was going to look at, so I can cut all that,
Mhm.
and then I export all that out to Descript, where I do my actual editing, and then I go back into Audition to do all my mixing. So,
Oh, wow. And there was me thinking I was working hard.
no, that speeds it up. That's why I have all those
Yeah,
three
yeah,
things,
yeah,
because
yeah,
it
yeah.
speeds it up for me.
That's crazy, isn't it? It really is, and the thing is, it's such a great reward as well, 'cause I'm sure you found this as well, that when you're doing a podcast, you don't know the people who are coming to see you, who the guests are. You know, you might get in touch with somebody, and then, for example, you. Hi, my name's Johnny. I'm in Sacramento. I'd love to be on your show. And I'm like, okay, thanks. I don't know anything about you, mate, but thank you very much. But then when you meet somebody and have a conversation with them, it's such a rewarding hobby for me, occupation for you, that you actually learn so much more about people than you
Y-
expect to.
yeah, I've met so many. I mean, I've done at this point thousands of interviews,
Yeah,
sitting fly on the wall or conducting them, whatever.
yeah, yeah,
And I've just met amazing people over the years. I go to here here in the United States, we have Podcast Movement. That's sort of the big podcast convention, and um, I've made amazing friends
yeah,
through that. Made amazing connections. Met wonderful, really just down to earth, good, decent people through
yeah,
that, through podcasting too. I've just in my city of Sacramento here, I've made tons of friends and met really neat people. I'm now in a stage where I mentor a lot of new freelancers, so I'm meeting people that way too, just through going out and saying hi and being asked to speak at things, and
yeah,
um, it's been I've met amazing people through podcasting. I love the
yeah.
community.
Yeah, so do I, and I'm fairly new into it, but the level of support that I've received has been it's quite awe-inspiring. It gives you that little kick up the bum when you start checking your listening, your analytics rather, and you see it lower than you hoped it would be. Yeah, it's just nice that there's somebody there going, "Hey, don't worry, it'll get better."
Yeah,
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 and if it doesn't,
yeah.
do better in the next podcast.
And all episodes have podcasts from episode to episode. They have their sort of ebb and flow.
Yeah,
Sometimes you're like, wow, I didn't expect that episode to do so well, and then the
yeah.
next one you're like, I really thought that
Yes,
was gonna
I
do
thought that was
better.
a really good one.
Yeah.
So after having done then thousands of podcasts, who's at the top of your list for collaborating with, either as an interviewer or doing a podcast with?
You mean like for potential clients or
Oh, no,
just
no, just
in
for
general?
yourself. If you were to start a new podcast tomorrow, who would you like to interview on that? Who's the top of the tree for you?
Actually, I did start a new podcast recently. I didn't think I was ever gonna host another podcast again, because I also had a comic book podcast that I did
Yeah,
with another friend and another friend, and then we ended up getting one friend left because she got married and just got too busy to do the podcast, and
yeah.
so we brought in a someone we had a series of guests on to see if they would fit as a host. And
Mhm.
so I hosted that. We did that one too. And then after that one ended, I was like, I think I'm done hosting. I just like being behind the scenes.
Yeah,
Um, but one of the colleagues, eventually a friend that I met at a podcast movement, we both do similar work. And we always ended up, especially me, at podcast movement, I end up talking to freelancers and just more than anybody else, I end up talking to freelancers and trying to give them just tips and
mm,
advice. Like, here's how you find clients. If you have a difficult client, here's how you drop them.
yeah,
Here's why you need to network and build community. And so we started a podcast about that, just just freelance advice
yeah.
for independent producers, directors, and audio engineers.
Mhm.
And so with that, the main what guests I would like to get on there, we're still in the planning phase of having guests. Right now, it's just the two of us. Is any just yeah, people who are in the community trying to figure out how to have a career as a
Yeah,
freelancer, um, who need help or advice or have advice to give to other people. Um, there's a there's a really strong industry of freelance producers, editors, and audio engineers,
mhm.
um, in podcasting and just trying to help them. That's the most important thing with our podcast is just trying to help.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think, from what I've seen, that the podcast community is um, as big over here, in the UK. Um,
Not yet.
Not yet, not
It's
yet.
getting there.
Yeah, but I think what we need is something like the podcast movement. We need a centralized place, and I know there is a smallish one that happened in London either last week or
Y-
this week.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
usually in the spring. It's like
yeah,
I think it's called Listen Something
yeah. I
or
think so. Yeah, um, but yeah, I think it's there's so many benefits to doing a podcast, even if it is just meeting new people and making new acquaintances or friendships, or if it is being able to pick up pieces of advice and tips or even coping mechanisms. I've spoken to people on this podcast who use music as a coping mechanism, or use interviews or comedy as a coping mechanism. And I think it's really really strong, not strange. It's not strange at all, but it's really strong that you can actually just interface with somebody across a webcam and get that support from them. I think it's really, really strong.
no, yeah, it's an amazing tool. One of the things I really like about podcasting too is you don't need a lot of money to do one. Um, Here in the United States, there's many libraries have
Yeah.
podcasting studios now, so you can go to your local library and record your podcast there.
Mhm.
Some of them, my girlfriend's a librarian, so the reason I know this is because my girlfriend's very big in the services that libraries
Okay.
provide communities. But they've got a system out here in Sacramento called the Library of Things,
Okay.
and you can go in and just borrow equipment and go
Fantastic.
home and use it there. But you can also just buy some, like I tell people, buy used equipment on
Mm.
equate
Yeah,
or
definitely.
Craigslist. I
Yeah.
don't know if there's
Just eBay,
Craigslist
just
over.
eBay over here, or
Oh,
Gumtree.
Craig Craigslist is a free. Well, it used to be free. It's not
Mm.
as they're charging now, but it's sort of like a wanted ads where
Yeah.
you could sell things and put apartments and stuff like that for rent. But people put equipment up there all the time for because they only did 10 episodes. They're like, well, I don't need this anymore.
Yeah.
But you could do it as simple as just having a USB
Yeah.
microphone, some headphones plugged into your laptop,
Yeah.
and or hell, even they make little decent mics now that plug into your smartphone.
They do,
So
and a
it,
lot of the podcast hosting sites have now got apps which allow you to record into your phone, do some
mhm,
rudimentary editing. They've
yeah.
got some sound libraries on there, and for the price of that, you could put something together. So I think it's just remember, listeners, it ain't a quick fix. you, you ain't suddenly going to release an episode unless you found the ultimate niche. You're not going to release one episode and get 1,000 listeners.
No, it's you. Uh, like I was saying with the one client, their episodes have doubled year over year,
Yeah,
but that's because we steadily put content out.
yeah,
We keep our episodes on the shorter side, so it's a
mhm,
little easier for the casual listener to get into.
yeah,
Um, and we're also very well, it's why they have me working with them, is like we put a lot of effort into the audio quality,
mhm,
the content of the show. We have sort of figured out the structure of the show. Hello, this is our guest. Please tell your story.
yeah,
That's the main three things you need to do in a podcast is entertain. These are the three things people want to hear in podcasting, or why they listen to podcasts: to be entertained,
yeah,
to learn something new, and to
mhm,
hear stories.
yeah,
So we take that approach with the productions that I run.
mhm,
Is let's let the guests tell their story.
yeah,
Let's make it entertaining.
mhm,
Let's keep it, keep moving along, and just give the listener, inform them so that they can make a decision when they come to visit this city.
yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. I want to go see that. I want to visit. In fact, just the other day, it was really neat. In fact, I need to tell the host of the podcast we're doing a bunch of recording tomorrow. Uh, I was at this luncheon, and there was two women there that worked for IKEA, um, here in Sacramento, and we were sitting there talking, and one of them was like, "Wait, what's your name?" And the listeners can't hear
Mhm.
this, but or see this. But
Yeah,
I've got a
got hats
hat with
on.
my logo on it, and and she goes, "Wait, you do podcasting?" Because she overheard me tell someone had asked me, and I was telling them that. I was like, "Yeah." She goes, "Wait, you're the Flores podcasting behind the Visit Sacramento podcast, right?" I was like, "Yeah, I run that." She goes, "That's part of the reason we moved here.
Oh,
We
brilliant.
yeah." She's like, "We were planning on moving somewhere to Northern California, and I started listening to the podcasts for the different cities that we were thinking of moving to, and we got hooked on Visit Sacramento podcast, and really we just loved the people that you talked to. It just seemed like a good city, so that was part of the reason
That
we moved here." I was like,
wow.
"Oh, that's crazy. Thank you. Like, thank you for sharing that with me. I
Yeah.
appreciate it." So
I hope the, city of Sacramento has recognized your good work in some way.
yeah, we have an amazing relationship.
Yeah,
I love working with the Visit Sacramento team. They're
yeah,
really progressive, forward thinking people, try to be inclusive, try to be welcoming. They're great clients. They pay on time.
yeah.
They like seriously consider me if we go a week or two without recording
Mhm.
because the host was on vacation or anything like that.
Yeah,
They try and double up before we take a break so that we could put content out while
yeah,
they're gone or I'm gone,
yeah,
and just very considerate people to work with. I love working with tourism groups
yeah.
because it's always positive stories. It's always like, you should come here and
Yeah,
see
yeah,
this
yeah.
for
And
this
always
reason.
and always a
And
budget as well.
yeah, they have budgets.
Yeah, yeah. Which is really it's the key, isn't it? Yeah. So,
Yeah.
looking in your podcast favorites at the moment then, who are you listening to?
It's hard for me to listen to podcasts
Oh,
because I'm recording and editing, so I can't listen to other things
oh,
while I'm doing that stuff.
yeah,
So it takes me a week to get through one episode, but I really love Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend.
yeah, yeah, good one.
Um, it it's the show isn't as pure as it used to be. You
Mhm.
could tell when there's a guest on because they have some they're booking some, like they have a project they need to talk about,
Yeah, yeah.
but I love it when he has comedians on.
Mhm.
In fact, today I started listening to the episode, on the day we were recording. I was listening to the episode where he has Stephen Wright, the
Oh,
comedian
yeah, yeah,
Stephen
yeah, yeah,
Wright, who I've loved since I was a
yeah,
kid, and it's just great listening to just two comedy minds
mhm.
sit there and talk and make each other laugh with no real agenda. He's got a book that's coming out, but they're just there to chat,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's pure joy. I love it. I also like Fly on the Wall, which is hosted by David Spade and Dana
Hmm.
Carvey, and
Yep.
they have people from SNL alumni
Yeah.
um, on there, and I love that podcast. Just I get a kick out of it. That's like my era of SNL
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
late '80s, early
Yeah.
'90s, and that's a blast to listen to. That's about it.
Yeah. Okay.
'Cause I don't it takes me a week to get through one episode,
Yeah,
so
I tend to use my podcast for listening to comedy. So, Two
yeah,
Bears,
same.
One Cave with Tom Segura and Bert Kreischer.
Oh, yeah, I do I'll listen to snippets of Your Mom's House
Oh,
that he
yeah,
hosts
yeah, yeah, yeah.
with his wife.
Very good.
I'll listen to depending on the comic, I'll listen to that one.
Yeah,
Once in a while, I listen to Comedy Gold Mines
yeah,
by Kevin Hart
yeah,
because that one's could be good.
yeah.
But it's so hit and miss for
Yeah,
me.
it's a pity because there's so much good content out there. But if you are creating good content, there's only so many
It's
hours in the day.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So,
it's hard.
what's your end goal then for Flores Podcast Productions? How
My
how do you want to
angle?
take it? Yeah, where do you want to take it?
Oh, I'm pretty happy with this. I don't plan on having any employees.
All right.
It's so much hard work.
Yeah.
You know, I kind of like mentoring because then I can say, well, you go find your niche
Mhm.
of clientele. Like I know my clientele. I like to work with companies that have anywhere from like 5 to maybe 100 employees
Okay.
because they're big enough where they have a marketing budget,
Mhm.
but they're small enough to where they need help.
Yeah.
They can't do it internally. Um, so like that's my niche. I know exactly who the size of the company or association I like to work with. But I'm I'm pretty happy right now. There's a local community call like I'm content.
Mhm.
My local community college is starting a podcast program in the fall, so I'm gonna build a podcast studio for
Oh,
them
fantastic.
and maybe be an occasional speaker at that.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe an advisor. We've talked off and on about that a little bit, just saying like, here's where you might want to concentrate on so people have a career, like post-production
Mhm.
career or
Yeah.
production career. Um, and I'm talking to couple other clients in the area. Uh, really, I only want about 4 or 5 clients at a time
Yeah.
because it's the workload's easy enough. It's busy enough, but also light enough where I can still take time for like my girlfriend and I, or if I want
Yeah.
to go
Yeah.
somewhere, I'm not so overwhelmed I can't have a life.
Yeah.
I learned that the hard way when I first started my business full time. I made the mistake of as soon as my girlfriend would leave for work, I'd start working.
Mhm.
I would forget to eat.
Yeah.
I would not take care of myself. And then I would work until she was like, okay, well, I'm going to bed. Like I wouldn't even acknowledge that she came home.
Yeah.
And it put a strain on us.
Mm.
It was not good for me. So I'm really conscious about like, okay, this is my work day. It's done now at 5 p.m. I'm done.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and also I have days set aside so I can like go work on our house,
Mhm.
not so that on the weekend I don't have to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So we could go and do stuff, I'm like,
Mhm.
cool. I have a day built in where I do
Yeah.
things around the house.
What a
So
fascinating story. It just shows that with the strength of a good relationship that you've both worked on and with a good determination of will that you can actually achieve pretty much anything you want to.
yeah, I think the other thing too is I don't um while money is nice,
Mm.
I'm not so hungry for it that I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get employees. I'm
Yeah.
gonna do this. I'm
Yeah.
gonna build out. I just want to have a comfortable life where I'm happy and
Yeah.
creative. I worked in the medical field for most of my adult life, and I hated it. It was
Yeah.
miserable. It was
Yeah.
not creative. I'm a creative person,
Mm.
and like I've really found I didn't want to like chase money and chase things and just be like what do you what can make you happy, like what are you
Mm.
content with? I'm
Yeah.
like, cool, if I have like if I have 5 clients, like that's more than enough income for me.
Yeah.
I'll still have my time. I'm very selective about who I work with. I don't
Mhm.
work with just anybody. I've actually, I turn clients down from time to time
Yeah.
when they'll contact me, and I'm just like in conversation and discovery. I'm like, I don't know if this is gonna be a good partnership.
Yeah.
I just this is, and I'm like, thank you for your time, and I'll try to refer them out to some other
Yeah.
people. Like, you might want to try this. I always try to leave them with a positive.
Yeah.
We can't work together, but here's how you can
Yeah.
still pursue your
And
podcast or
that's a
whatever.
really good tip for somebody that's starting a podcast. If you're starting a podcast and you're having guests on it, be selective who your guests are.
Yes.
Yeah, because it might sound a little bit grand, but you are working on a brand, and your audience, your following, will attach to you because of your brand. So try and keep to a set of rules, a set of standards. And just because somebody says I'd like to come on your podcast doesn't mean you should let them on. You know,
No, my old podcast, that got the ball rolling on everything, was it was about Sacramento.
yeah,
It was about the people here that I thought were contributing to making it a good place to live, that were making our city unique. And so I was very selective about who I had on.
yeah,
I would put out a questionnaire to maybe a dozen people that I trusted. Like, they're they're gonna recommend people who are doing good stuff,
yeah,
and they're not doing it to get attention or fame or anything like that. So once in a while, not once in a while, as the show progressed, it got more and more frequent.
mm,
Where people would just write me and be like, "Hey, I'm doing this really cool thing. I'm gonna be famous or whatever." Whatever. I could tell when there was
yeah,
ego involved, and I would just write "Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I've already booked all the guests for this
mm,
season.
yeah,
I'll reach out in the
yeah,
future if I find." Basically, I'll reach out to in the future when I'm booking guests again,
yeah.
and so it was never a negative. I never wanted to send them away with a
Oh
negative,
no,
like, "Oh,
no,
this guy
no, no.
doesn't like me."
It costs nothing to be
Um,
respectful, does it? Yeah,
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 yeah, like, "Thank you so much, I appreciate it.
yeah,
I've already booked everybody."
yeah, yeah. Be polite because you never know. They might come back with a really good story at some point.
Also, like, that's a lesson I learned before I even started my businesses. I always try to leave on a positive note, even if uh, my very first client that I had, they were not very pleasant people to work with,
Okay.
and I tried to be as respectful as possible when I said, "Hey," basically I put it in the ball in their court to not work together.
Yeah.
And they were upset about a couple things, and I said, "Hey, I'm sorry." They wanted some files, and I had mentioned before, uh I'd emailed twice to the main person. I said, "Hey, second email, first email, if I don't hear from you by such and such date, I'm gonna delete these files because I don't they're taking up space. I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah,
using
yeah,
them.
yeah.
If you need anything, please let me know." No response.
Mhm.
Second email, same thing, no response.
Yeah,
2 weeks go by, and then the owner said, "Where are our files at?" And I was like, I messaged so and so,
yeah.
nobody responded, so I deleted all the files, and they just went off on me, and said they were gonna badmouth me and
Mhm.
everything. And I was like, I go, "Do what you need to do. That's totally, if that's how you feel. Please do whatever you need to
Yeah.
do. I have a very good reputation in my community.
Mhm.
I'm if anybody asks, I'm more than willing to explain what happened.
Yep.
Also, if you had asked, I would have told you where you could go and find these
Yeah.
files online." And then they wrote back and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, but how can we get those files?" And I was like, "X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, yeah.
Best of luck in life. I appreciate
Yeah,
our password."
it's
You
amazing
know,
how adrenaline takes over people sometimes, and
the
they're
lizard brain.
yeah, lizard brain, that's it. That's exactly what I was searching
It's
for.
fear based.
Yeah, 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 totally. Yeah. Oh, I've lost that. Oh, I need it. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
my last job, I worked at a municipal animal shelter,
Oh, that's
so
okay.
I
Yeah.
dealt with the public a lot,
Yeah.
and I was like middle management, and I had 6 employees under me, and we dealt with customers and clients and people who were coming in because their dogs got picked up,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
they got a ticket or something like that. They got a fine or whatever, and I would tell because they were all so much younger than me. um, I would tell the clerks, I'm just like, don't. They're coming in here. Their mindset is coming from a place of fear,
Yeah.
and you can't think rationally if the lizard fear part of your brain is what's you've lost all high functioning. It's
Yeah.
just the lizard brain. So just try to deal with them as politely as you can. Take the time to explain things, and just realize they're stuck in that moment. They're stuck being them, and
Mhm.
we're not them, so we win by
Exactly. Yeah.
default.
Yeah. And once they've gone, you can continue to be yourself.
Yeah, and then we could just go back to being our joyful, fun selves, and they're stuck living that life.
Yeah. Oh God. Well, Johnny, thank you so much. I'll put your socials in the podcast descriptor. So if anybody wants to reach out to you or anyone wants to
Oh,
follow you,
sure.
yeah, I'll put all that on. But it's been an absolutely fascinating chat with you. I really appreciate your time and thank you for your support. And if you've ever got another story or another podcast, or come back on, just give me a shout, come back on, and we'll have
Well,
another chat.
I guess I didn't say the name of the podcast. I should have. It's the Podcast Producers Survival Handbook.
I found it
So
before, yeah. So I was, oh,
yeah,
yeah,
so if you're thinking of getting into, if you just want some freelance advice, like please listen to the
yeah,
podcast. It's only at the time of the recording, we've only put 3 episodes
yeah.
up, but we've got more coming, and
Brilliant.
hopefully it's helpful
Yeah.
to someone out
I'll
there.
I'll
So
put that on the podcast
cool.
descriptor as
Thanks.
well.
And thank you, Phil. I appreciate the opportunity to
Hey,
chat with
no
you.
worries.
And I know this is late in the day for you. It's middle of the day for me here, but
Uh,
or mid morning.
yeah, and it's warm where you are and it's raining where I am.
Yeah.
Thanks for rubbing it in. Appreciate that.
But yeah, thank you for your time,
Yeah, thank you,
and
sir.
I really appreciate the
Great.
opportunity to be on your podcast.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you. Thank you for listening to this episode. Thank you to our guest. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. Feel free to hit us up on any of the socials. And our website is www.mondostreet.co.uk. Looking forward to seeing you again on our next episode. Bye.